So you get repetition. You're finding something that you start seeing across a series of problems or solutions that you see, hey, I see some repetition here. Well, then you want to look at, is there, because you're going to see that repetition, but you're also going to see like exceptions and error handling and things of that nature that are, because you're sort of going to come up with a germ of an idea. And then with that, you're going to see, okay, how did these vary? And when I say exceptions and error handling, it's more about, it's not really the technical writing exceptions or handling errors, but it's more, I think of it as you're reading a paper and there's a concept that's presented to you and you say, well, that doesn't really work all the time. Or there are certain cases that we maybe do see that are outliers that we realize that, yes, this pattern works. However, here are some situations where it doesn't. So even though we're presenting, for example, a pattern, part of the pattern is going to say, hey, here's some places that this is going to be useful. We may also say, here's some places where it's not as useful, or maybe not useful at all. There may be, sort of like some red herring type situations where you say, oh, that may look like it's a perfect use of this pattern, but it's not. So you start with sort of a rough draft of, here's my idea of what a pattern is, or what this anti-pattern is. And then with that, you want to look at it with a critical eye of, okay, is this like a global pattern? Does it only work in certain situations? And then you want to take that, which is probably going to be a somewhat complex and a little bit amorphous idea, and turn it into some sort of documentation that is a little more readable and easy to maintain. And good examples of this exist all over the web. If you go search patterns and anti-patterns, much like use cases and other things that show up over and over again, you can see some pretty nice formats for documenting one of these. So pick a format that is readable and pretty easy to maintain. A lot of times it's things like, what's the name of the pattern? What are maybe some alternate names for the pattern? Where is it most useful? What is it? How does it work? And then, here's an example of it in action, something like that. That kind of a page fits very well to like a wiki site or something like that, where it should be fairly easy for you to read it and make adjustments as needed. And then, because it goes back to the rule of three, is basically saying, okay, now that we've thought about this, we've documented this pattern and anti-pattern, let's look at it as, are there some ways that are there ways to extend this or to make it more encompassing, or maybe even spawn another pattern based on what we're seeing? Are there it's sort of like you've looked at it and you found some repetition, you found some areas that are possibilities. Once you've done that, do you sweep through again and see, or you sweep through again and do you see maybe some additional repetitions and possibilities? Particularly like if you're building out for your organization or your personal history, if you're looking through and you're starting to say, hey, here's some patterns I see. Well, maybe in those patterns, there may be patterns of patterns. She may see that, well, we did these 10 different patterns, and this piece or this step occurred in every one of those. So maybe we want to essentially abstract that out and say, oh, by the way, here's yet another pattern that shows up. And we've talked about those a little bit before. I can't remember if we called them meta patterns or super patterns, but it was basically, if you're dealing with these types of situations, here's some patterns that you're going to look at. And it may even be a pattern where it says, here's the thing you want to do, but also as part of your solution, let's go in and it may be a combination of patterns and anti-patterns where it says, here's your overarching pattern, but within that, you're probably going to use these 3 patterns, and you're probably going to worry about not doing these 4 anti-patterns and things like that. And that's why going back to up above, this is why you want this to be pretty readable and easy to maintain, is you want to be able to, have nice little bullet points or highlighted notes or something like that it's easy for you to sort of like keep this as a living document and grow. The ones we see out on the web, or if we buy a book, those are static. Those aren't generally speaking going to change very much. But that's the opportunity when we create our own patterns and anti-patterns, we get to continue to refine them and make them better and better. And then as we're going through this, we want to make sure that we do keep it. You think about like commenting code and things like that. You want to keep that up to date. Well, it's the same thing with your patterns and anti-patterns. You want to review them often enough and keep the documentation for it pretty clean and concise, because if we don't, it's going to make it pretty hard to share. Which brings us to the next point. So once you've built this, you're doing this to some extent for your own becoming a better developer kind of approach, but also you want to be able to give back. And so what you want to do with that is think about one, it's going to cost you to do it. There's going to be some time and some reflection that you're going to have to do to think about, is this something that's makes sense to share? Is this something that is a general kind of situation, or is it something that I run into because of my weaknesses, my challenges, my experience, knowledge, or lack thereof? So when you're sharing your knowledge, you realize, there's going to be a little bit of cost to it. And part of that, though, is that you want to spend some time in that, doing that retrospection, is reviewing what it is that you've put together. Because this actually is sort of, while you're investing time in it, you're also investing in yourself. Because if you're reviewing it to the point of being able to talk to somebody else about it, or to teach somebody else, what is this pattern or this anti-pattern, then you are helping to really firm that knowledge in your mind as well. It's why, people can complain about, teachers teach and those that can do, but you also find that teachers that teach the same thing, they know that topic, they can regurgitate that topic pretty darn well, because they've thought about it over and over again. It's the same thing here, is that we've thought about it to build our pattern and anti-pattern, but also now we've thought about sharing that, and how would we talk to somebody else about that pattern or that anti-pattern. And so when we communicate it, we do want to make sure that we try to avoid like buzzwords and internal concepts and line of business specific language where possible. So if we're using a pattern that is a general pattern, but we've built it out of a bunch of healthcare applications we created, we want to make sure that when we share that pattern, we don't have a lot of healthcare related lingo that's a part of it. And these are somewhat general communication types of bullet points and skills, but it is a little bit different because this is more of a, in some sense, it feels like a casual kind of sharing of patterns and anti-patterns, but you want to make sure it's formal enough that it is useful and reproducible. And the reason you want to do this, the reason you want to spend these costs, is really to help out the community. This is sort of like giving back to others, because you've probably benefited quite a bit from patterns and anti-patterns over the months or years or decades that you've been professional. And this is how such things get created, and how the developer community, such as it is, whether it's specific to a language or platform, or just the overall sort of loose software development community, it's how you give back into that has fed you, whether you realize it or not. And I think most people do now, because you can go your favorite search engine and search just about any problem that you want to solve, and you can find some discussion of it, at least, if not some, right down to absolutely perfect code examples of solving that problem. And that saves us who knows how much time. And so it just sort of makes sense for us to say, because of all the times that I've been saved, I'm going to spend a little bit of time and give back and provide to the development community. And as part of this is part of our our review and our retrospection is think about it a little bit. Is this something, and this is probably sort of more upfront at the first part of it, is this useful to you? This pattern or this anti-pattern that you're thinking about sharing out, is this something that you wish you had before? Probably. Is it something that you will use in the problems you solve ahead? Possibly. And then with that, it's like, okay, this seems to be useful. Well, let's make sure that we review it and strip out the specific problem language and items so that this is a good general case pattern. Because sometimes we get a little bit focused on the weeds, I guess, for the problem we're working on. And we say, oh yeah, we need to do all of this. And when you step back, you look at it and say, oh, well, yeah, I need to do those 3 steps within this pattern for my specific problem or my line of business. But generally speaking, you could maybe generalize that and just say, you need to do, you can turn it into 1 step and say, here's something you need to consider. For example, you may have something that is like let's say a customer record that has, first name, last name, account ID, city, state, zip, things like that. You may have specific things that you do that you say, oh yeah, I got to make sure that this zip code format and this address format is properly handled for my specific case. That you have a proper, like I say, it's a US, you have a proper US address and US zip code. And then you find out that, well, once you go beyond the US, those rules change a little bit. And so in that case, instead of having language that talks about things that are specific to a US address verification, as you just say, make sure that you have a address verification process involved as part of your pattern. It may seem like a little bit of picking nits in a sense, a little nitpicky type of approach, but it really does help to take that step and generalize the language and the text that you use. Don't be afraid to do, and actually definitely, even if you are afraid, do some sort of a code review, process review with maybe some of your coworkers or peers or things like that. Or maybe even just family members, whatever, to have somebody read back over it. Because this is something you want to be, you want to think of it as like, this is something you're publishing to some extent. This is this is going to be, reflect on you a little bit. So make sure that you do things like, grammar checking and spell checking, but also just make sure that the wording that you use, the phrasing that you use, that, some other people have taken a look at it can say, yep, that makes sense. Or I have no idea what you're saying here. And then, now you've got it is do a nice little write-up of your pattern or anti-pattern. And in doing so, this is where you basically publish it, whether it's to, you can create a blog article either on your site or maybe there's a certain site somewhere that it makes sense to post. I'm trying to think of various places. Maybe it's like a Reddit or, one of those kinds of places, or maybe like I don't even know who would be available for like a Ars Technica or one of those that are more technical type sites. You may want to, if you have a podcast, you may want to do an episode on it. If you may listen to a podcast where it makes sense to reach out to that person and be a guest and talk about your patterns or anti-patterns. Maybe you've got a Slack channel that's either internal or a group like Developer or like a users group or developers group for your platform or wherever you are geographically, that it makes sense to post these out and get it out there so other people can take advantage of your work and benefit from some of your experience. So what do we learn? What was the point of this? It was really reiterate that, hey, patterns are a way for us. It's a way for us to solve problems and to get there faster, as opposed to us having to reinvent the wheel. Anti-patterns are similar. These are ways for us to avoid obstacles. You can think of them as warning signs as you're driving down the road, so you don't run into the same pothole or take the same wrong turn that somebody before did. And this goes back to the idea, we all individually, whether we've been doing this for 6 months or 60 years, we have experience that is unique to us, and there is a value in sharing it with others. And so why not? And part of it is because we want to give back. People have taught us, the experience of other people has benefited us. So let's take that and turn that back to the community and provide our experience in a way that is helpful to others. And then the other thing is that we do get a little, sort of as a selfish point, is when we do something like this and teach others our lessons, it helps firm it in our mind and helps us understand it better. Questions and comments? If anybody's talking, you are muted.
So, hey, Rob, so if you're new on the project and they got bad practices, so how would you solve those bad partners in case people don't continue? I mean, in case you know what a good partner might be. So how do you solve that?
Well, if they've got some bad practices, then I'm going to assume that there are some anti-patterns that they have adopted. And what those can either be, they may be things that are generally known that you can point to it and say, hey, here's a well-known anti-pattern that we're doing, and so we need to stop it. Or this is where you do take a look at it and say, hey, we have this practice that we have done for a while, and we can see where it has been a failure or not pleasant or has caused us headaches. And that's where you walk through it and say, okay, we've done this a bunch and it has taken us to the same bad place each time. And so you can take a look and say, well, here's, analyze it and say, well, how did we get there? Oh, in each of these cases, these are the three things we did. So let's talk about not doing those three things the next time we get into that situation. This is, it goes back to sort of that repetition and reviewing it and say, hey, it looks like this, when we do this bad outcome occurs. So let's talk about not doing that, whether it's, it may be something where you just say, don't do it at all, or it may be something where you say, we still need to go down that path, but we need to find a smarter way to do it. And it's either, it may be something that you can see as you're looking at it and you can say, hey, I see where if we make these changes, we can avoid these bad practices. Or it may be something, in that case, because you're sort of, if you're coming into a place where there's a lot of bad practices, where it may be worth it to just say, hey, this is what I see. I see these things causing these bad results. Why don't we talk about how we can avoid doing those things? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense. Yeah, thank you. Yeah. So hopefully they will be able to be, some adapt to the new changes, because sometimes, those new changes usually are very hard to kick out if people are used to doing things a certain way.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Yeah, it makes sense. Thank you.
Other questions and comments? I see you're unmuted, but I'm not hearing you, Mike. You have to have your mic turned off, maybe.
Hopefully, is Mike saying something? Is he on mute?
It looked like he did for a second, and then he muted. So it may be an audio issue there. Let's see. Oh, here's a chat. He's probably running too.
Yeah, he sent it.
Oh, here we go. Maybe we can do a follow up to this one on how to contribute to the community. That's probably not a bad idea. Just sort of take that publishing side of it and how to take it beyond just getting it out there. Good point. Okay, so let me get this out of my way so I can actually see here. Yeah. As always, thank you as always for your time, your contribution to become a better developer. Spending this time and investing in yourself helps all of us. That's our goal, is making every developer better. And as always, if you have any questions, comments, anything for us, including suggestions to, enhance this or future topics, and email us at info@developreneur.com. There's a contact us form out at developreneur.com. We have our YouTube channel where we post stuff every Tuesday and Thursday. We have our Vimeo channel where we have some longer form videos that show up from time to time, including a lot of these presentations. And we've got a paid Developreneur page out there on facebook.com. And that being said, thank you for your time, and we'll talk to you next time.